You stood there, heart in hand, offering what most people spend their whole lives praying for: love that doesn't waver, presence that doesn't vanish, patience that doesn't ask for applause. And still, they pulled away. Not because you weren't enough, but because they couldn't hold what was too real, too safe, too intimate, too close. You thought if you gave a little more, stayed a little longer, proved your loyalty just one more time, they would finally realize who you were to them. They would choose you. Stay, open up. But avoidants don't work that way. Not until it's too late. Not until the silence you never wanted to give becomes the silence they're forced to live with. Not until the love they once feared disappears into someone else's arms. Not until your absence begins to feel louder than your presence ever did. Only then do they start to unravel. Not all at once, but slowly, as they notice that something sacred is no longer accessible, that the door they kept walking past has quietly closed. Here's what no one tells you. Avoidants don't usually realize they love you while you're still offering it. They realize it when you stop, when your energy is no longer waiting in the wings, when your empathy stops absorbing their emotional distance, when your patience turns to silence. Because to someone with an avoidant attachment style, intimacy is both desired and feared. They crave closeness, but the moment it starts to feel too real, they pull back, they run, they rationalize, they call you too much, when in fact, it's the depth inside them they're afraid to face. So they withdraw, ghost, detach, tell themselves they don't care, until one day they look around and you're no longer there. And that's when the truth finally hits them. Not because they stopped caring, but because for the first time, there's no one left to distract them from themselves. And that brings us to the deeper question: why? Why do avoidants only realize what they had after it's already gone? Why does it take distance to reveal the depth of their feelings? Why can't they receive love while it's being offered with open hands? And more importantly, what do you do when someone finally sees your worth, but only in your absence? Do you go back? Do you wait? Or do you finally choose the one person they couldn't? You. In this video, we're going to unpack what's really happening inside the avoidant when they start to realize they've lost something irreplaceable. We'll dive into the psychology, the emotional triggers, the silent regret, and why, for many of them, your departure is the first time they've ever felt the true weight of connection. Because some people don't recognize real love until it no longer waits for them. To understand why avoidants don't recognize your value until you're gone, we have to go back, not to your relationship, but to theirs. Not the one they had with you, but the one they had with love itself. Avoidant attachment doesn't begin in adulthood. It begins in childhood, in the subtle, silent, and often invisible ways love was withheld, misused, or made conditional. Picture a child who learned that vulnerability wasn't safe, that opening up led to shame, that needing others brought punishment or rejection, that emotions were too much for the parent, for the family, for the moment. So they adapted. They stopped asking, stopped feeling, stopped reaching. And in the quiet of that early abandonment, a survival strategy was born. I don't need anyone. If I don't get close, I can't get hurt. They didn't choose this strategy consciously. They inherited it as armor, an unconscious vow. Closeness equals danger. Distance equals control. So they became self-sufficient, emotionally restrained, externally composed, but internally frozen. Not because they're cold, but because they were never taught how to stay warm in the presence of love. Now fast forward to your relationship with them. You offer what seems like a miracle: consistency, empathy, space for their truth. You hold them, even when they push. You forgive them, even when they withdraw. You love them without making them earn it. But to someone who associates intimacy with danger, that kind of love feels suspicious. Here's what you need to know. To the avoidant, love doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like pressure. Your affection lights a fire they've spent years trying to keep dormant. Your presence awakens needs they've long suppressed. And suddenly, they're not in control anymore. They can't hide. They can't detach without consequence. And that, to them, is terrifying. So they do what they've always done. They back away. They minimize. They intellectualize. They say things like, "I'm just not ready for a relationship. You deserve someone better. I don't know how I feel. I need space." And if you've ever been on the receiving end of that, you know how gut-wrenching it is. Because you weren't asking for perfection. You weren't even asking for everything. Just honesty. Just effort. Just a chance. But avoidants often confuse emotional availability with emotional danger. The more open you are, the more exposed they feel. The closer you get, the more they fear they'll lose themselves. And here's the tragedy. The very love that could heal them becomes the love they run from. Not because they don't want it, but because their nervous system was never taught how to receive it. So what happens? They distance. You hold on tighter. They pull back further. You try to prove your worth. They get overwhelmed. You lose yourself trying to save someone who was never taught how to be held. And eventually, your spirit grows tired. You don't want to walk away, but something in you starts whispering, "This isn't love. This is emotional starvation. I can't be the only one reaching. I deserve to be chosen without begging for it." So you begin to detach, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. And the moment that happens, the moment you stop chasing, stop fixing, stop softening your boundaries to make them feel safe, something shifts in them. The space they once demanded becomes unbearable. The quiet they once weaponized starts echoing. The version of you they thought would always be there is no longer waiting. And finally, without your emotional energy to buffer them from themselves, they start to feel what they've suppressed for years. Longing, regret, realization. They begin to see that you weren't trying to take their freedom. You were trying to love their humanity. But for many avoidants, that understanding comes too late. Because by the time they realize what they lost, you've already learned to live without needing them to see it. When the avoidant finally realizes you're the one, it doesn't look like a Hollywood apology. There's no dramatic knock at the door, no teary-eyed confession in the rain. Instead, it's quiet, slow, uneven, and often painfully late, because the realization doesn't hit all at once. It seeps in, it haunts them, it unsettles them in the moments they least expect. Like hearing a song that used to make them roll their eyes, but now makes their throat tighten, or catching the scent of something you used to wear, and wondering why their chest suddenly aches. This is what happens when the avoidance defenses begin to break down, when the emotional armor that once protected them starts to feel like a prison. They may not say it aloud. In fact, they probably won't. But something inside them begins to stir. They really did care for me. Maybe I was safe with them. Maybe I pushed away the only person who ever saw me. And now, in your absence, they're left with a kind of grief that avoidants are rarely taught how to process. Ambiguous loss. It's not just that you're gone. It's that they realize you were real. Not a fantasy. Not a game. Not someone who was trying to control them, but someone who actually loved them and was willing to wait until they made you wait too long. And now, they sit with what they never thought they'd feel. Regret, longing, shame, the silent, gnawing question. Why did I run from something so good? But here's the darker truth they won't always admit. You leaving isn't just about losing you. It's about being forced to face themselves. Avoidants build their entire emotional worldview on one fragile belief. I'm safer alone. Your presence challenged that. Your love confronted that. Your consistency revealed just how much they had suppressed. So when you're gone, they aren't just mourning your absence. They're spiraling into a confrontation with their own emotional poverty. They start to notice how empty their life feels without your energy. Not because they need you in a dependent way, but because your love created a kind of light they didn't know they were missing. And now they're left in the dim shadows of a self they can no longer pretend is whole. This is when the avoidance emotional architecture starts to crack. The numbing no longer works. The distractions don't satisfy. And the false stories they told themselves. They were too clingy. I wasn't ready. They'll move on. Start to dissolve. They begin to see that what they called too much was actually what they needed. That what they labeled intensity was simply depth. That what they once feared, your love, your vulnerability, your presence, was never the threat. Their avoidance was. But by the time they realized this, the damage has already been done. Because while avoidants take time to feel, your healing didn't wait. You started rebuilding, not out of spite, but out of survival. You began to remember your worth, to reparent your own wounds, to see that love shouldn't feel like convincing someone to stay. And now, when they think about reaching out, they feel the hesitation you once lived with. What if it's too late? This is the consequence no one talks about. Not just losing a relationship, but realizing you can't unsee the truth anymore. They finally see your value, but you finally see your value, too. And it's that mutual clarity, arriving at different times, that creates a chasm too wide to cross. They are haunted by the moment they finally could have loved you, but didn't. And you are healed by the moment you finally stopped waiting for them to. This is not revenge. It's not karma. It's the cost of avoidance. Because every time they avoided a hard conversation, they were teaching you how to live without them. And every time they pulled away, they were quietly pushing you toward your own strength. And now, you're standing in it. Firm, whole, unwilling to shrink for someone who only knows how to love you after you've gone. There comes a moment in every soul's journey where something breaks. Not out of bitterness, not out of hatred, but out of clarity. You realize that staying, waiting, hoping, shrinking is no longer love. It's self-abandonment. And that moment becomes holy because it's the start of your rebellion, not against them, but against every version of you that thought love meant proving your worth to the unavailable. For so long, you confused their silence with mystery. You mistook their pullback for depth. You thought your consistency would heal their inconsistency. But now, you see the truth. You were offering a love that required presence, and they were only capable of distance. Breaking free doesn't always mean cutting them off with cruelty. It doesn't mean turning cold or pretending you never cared. It means something more radical than that. Choosing yourself in the face of being emotionally erased. And that's not easy, because if you've ever loved an avoidant, you know the bond is not just emotional. It's psychological. You were dancing in a dynamic that mirrored something older, something deeper. A child trying to win the love of an unavailable parent. An inner voice whispering, if I can just be patient enough, calm enough, good enough, they'll stay. But that's not partnership. That's reenactment. And the rebellion is to end the cycle. To say, I will no longer sacrifice my needs for the illusion of connection. I will no longer carry the weight of two people's emotional labor. I will no longer wait to be chosen by someone who doesn't know how to receive love without fear. And this rebellion is quiet. It looks like unfollowing them, not to hurt them, but to protect your peace. Not replying to the "I miss you" message when it comes, because you know it's not followed by action. No longer explaining your worth to someone who only sees it once it's gone. You begin to stop reacting and start reclaiming. You take your focus off of them and turn it inward. What part of me needed this dynamic to feel familiar? Where did I first learn that love feels like distance? What am I afraid I'll lose if I truly walk away? These are not easy questions, but they are the doorway to liberation. Because healing from the avoidant doesn't just mean leaving them behind. It means no longer being magnetized to what harms you. It means learning to sit with your own feelings without waiting for someone else to regulate them for you. It means learning to soothe the inner child who still believes they have to earn love. To parent the version of you that was once told, "Your feelings are too much. Don't cry. Be strong." And now, you're strong in a new way. Not through suppression, but through self-compassion. This rebellion looks like redefinition. Love is no longer about anxiety. Love is no longer about waiting for breadcrumbs. Love is no longer about proving you're worthy of basic emotional presence. Love now must look like peace. Love must sound like honesty. Love must feel like safety, not performance. You begin to raise your standards, not because you're heartless, but because your heart has finally healed enough to say no. No to mixed signals. No to delayed clarity. No to the emotional limbo you once confused with chemistry. And that's when something shifts. The part of you that once longed for their recognition no longer needs it. You become the one who sees, the one who chooses, the one who walks away, not to punish, but to preserve. And if they return, as they often do, you will no longer be the same person they left behind. You will no longer be waiting with an open wound. You will be waiting with a full heart and a higher threshold for what love must actually look like. That's the rebellion. Not running, not retaliating, but rising. There is a moment, after the grief, after the detachment, after the silence, where something inside you finally clicks. Not in anger, not in heartbreak, but in truth. You realize you were never asking for too much. You were simply offering it to someone who didn't know what to do with that much love. And maybe for the first time, you stop making excuses for them. You stop romanticizing the pain. You stop telling yourself that if you had just been more patient, more quiet, more forgiving, it would have worked. Because now you see, the love you gave wasn't the problem. The problem was who you were giving it to. Someone who didn't yet have the capacity to receive it. Someone who confused safety with suffocation. Someone who mistook your emotional availability for a threat to their freedom. And the most powerful realization is this: you were the mirror they couldn't bear to look into. Because your love exposed what they lacked. Your presence revealed their avoidance. Your vulnerability illuminated their walls. You didn't break them. You revealed them to themselves. And instead of facing that truth, they ran. But the gift? The gift is that they gave you space to finally face your own reflection, too. To ask, why did I stay so long for someone who wouldn't meet me halfway? Why did I overfunction for someone who undercommitted? What was I really trying to prove? And in that holy, painful self-inquiry, you meet a new version of yourself. One who no longer begs for love. One who no longer waits for breadcrumbs. One who no longer calls disconnection passion. You stop chasing closure because you are the closure. Your clarity is the ending. Your healing is the punctuation. And now, you no longer need them to finally see your worth. Because you do. You see the way you showed up, the way you loved, the way you stayed soft in the face of silence. And you realize you didn't lose them. They lost you. Because the version of you that once tolerated uncertainty now lives in truth. The version of you that once begged for clarity now speaks it. The version of you that once feared abandonment now chooses herself. And if they come back, not with regret, but with reflection, not with charm, but with changed behavior, not with fear, but with responsibility, then maybe, just maybe, a new kind of relationship could be born. But if not, you've already found the most important love of all, your own. The love that no longer tolerates emotional scraps. The love that no longer sees someone's potential as a reason to stay. The love that doesn't just want to be chosen, but to be met. And here's the deepest truth of all. The one who can love you now, fully, safely, openly, is the one who doesn't need to lose you first in order to realize your worth. They see it from the beginning. They protect it. They meet your energy. They welcome your depth, not as a threat, but as a gift. And because you did the work, because you broke the pattern, because you stopped giving yourself away to people who weren't ready, you'll recognize them when they come. And you'll know this time. You're not too much. You never were. You were simply waiting to be met by someone whose heart doesn't panic when love finally feels real. So if this message found you in the middle of your own healing, if you've ever poured your love into someone who only saw its worth after you left, know this: you are not too much. You were just too real for someone who wasn't ready. But now it's your turn to be loved in real time, to be chosen without delay, to be met by someone who doesn't need your absence to understand your value. And if this resonated with you, don't let it end here. Like the video if it gave voice to your experience. Comment below. Tell me what part hit your soul the most. Subscribe for more deep, healing conversations that validate your truth and protect your heart. Because the ones who learn to love themselves are the ones who finally attract the love they never have to chase. You're not here to be forgotten. You're here to be felt.